love playing baseball. As a kid, I joined the local league and had a blast riding my bike across town to play. I lived in a very small LDS community at the time, and it was safe to ride your bike across town at the age of 8. I had a sense of independence, of freedom as I coasted down the hills to the ballpark. The food truck at the end of the field was ever full of candy. Big League Chew and candy cigarettes were my personal favorites. Then there was the game, and the feeling of being on a team. Belonging to a group of other kids is important at that age. The problem was, though I was great up at bat, I was subpar on the field. The team quickly turned against me. After weeks of failing to connect with the other kids, I asked my stepfather if I could just stay home. I loved the sport, but the experience was painful for me. My father told me something that stuck with me till this day. Adam, a man sticks with his commitments. Sometimes it'll be hard, but you gave your word, and that is all you have in the end. Now, on the surface, it's a macho-manly statement, but it can also keep you in the corner and miserable if followed to the letter. In the end, the bowling became too much for me, and I stopped going to the games. My stepfather was disappointed in me, but it became a burden and was ruining my love for the game and team sports in general. I could pretend the kids pushed me out or that I abandoned the team, but the truth, as it usually does, lies somewhere in the middle. I learned at the age of 8 that you can't please everyone, and if you're not happy with what you're doing, try to change it and make it work. If that doesn't work, move on and focus on the next experience. I would later read this in The Devil's Notebook by Anton Szandor LaVey. Duck-billed platitudes. If at first you don't succeed, try and try again. A sure way of making a pest of yourself. Better, if at first you don't succeed, wait and see what happens. If nothing happens, try a different approach. If still unsuccessful, try someone or somewhere else. That was the beginning of what later I would identify as a lifetime on the outside. It's not something I choose or even pride myself inherently with. It's a simple reality, and I live it. It was also around this time that I was baptized into the LDS religion. I understand why I never fit in on the ball field, but I didn't understand why I couldn't fit in with the other kids at Sunday school. I don't recall ever doing anything against them or to them besides being honest when I liked or didn't like what they said, did, or wore. I've come to accept that they could smell the beast on me and rejected my brutal honesty. After a healthy few months of trying to get along with the other kids, I stopped, and my parents were good enough to let me stay home. I never saw it as withdrawing, as I would continuously try to connect with others, but it rarely ended in friendship. Now, this isn't a sob story. I had very good friends as a child. These were close connections that lasted up until the point we moved yet again, which seemed to be about every 5 years until I was a young man. The one link I shared with those who would be my friends was being on the outside. You see, there was the jungle of kiddom where all the little monkeys played, and then there's the outside, the wasteland, where we lived. We'd stand on the outside, looking in. It wasn't until I had multiple friends physically attack me that I came to the conclusion I'd never fit in. So I stopped trying. Rocks in the face and fights in the street send a clear message as a kid. I don't apologize for who I am. I accept that I will never be able to connect with everyone, and in truth, I learned not to try or care. To those who resonate with me, I welcome you. When you stop, I accept it. I will not change who I am to fit in or to get along. And if I'm engaged in an activity that is not working out for me, I'll try and shift its focus and keep my word. But if it becomes counterproductive in the end, I won't waste my time with it. Side note, I still love playing baseball. When I read the Satanic Bible the first time and came across the 9 satanic statements, I was lifted up inside. When I got to that 7th satanic statement, my inner fire grew to an inferno. Satan represents man as just another animal, sometimes better, more often worse than those that walk on all fours, who, because of his divine, spiritual, and intellectual development, has become the most vicious animal of all. This explained my entire youth in one really long sentence. I know most people that read this think of how man treats the natural world around him, or how cruel he can be to his fellow man, or even how deeply hypocritical between his declared beliefs and actions he can be. But there are those that use it as an excuse to behave like an animal. At the core of this interpretation is the inability of that individual to accept responsibility for their mind or actions, and use this as an excuse to stay at the base of the human experience. I believe this is an inherent flaw in the individual, but more, completely antithetical to the behavior of a Satanist. After all, just one line above the 7th satanic statement is the 6th. Satan represents responsibility to the responsible instead of concern for psychic vampires. As a young man, I was exposed to these vermin more than I would like to admit. I was opening myself up to them and allowing them to drain me of resources, energy, and ambition. I truly believed these were my friends. Thus, I refused to take the responsibility for my situation. They took care of me. They seemed to support me as long as I didn't reach too high, and ultimately proved to be holding me back. I learned this lesson, and though it wasn't as clear as a rock in the face, it hurt just as much. I decided to take responsibility for my own life, turning my back on my supposed friends, and looked to the future. I would ultimately join the United States Army, and was forced to get along with others. Now, this was a culture shock in every way. I was always on the outside, and now I was deep, deep inside the cult of personality of the soldier. What I had learned as a child and young man would prove to be key to my success in this institution. It was a means to an end. I wanted to go to college, but I couldn't afford it, so the United States Army was my ticket. I just had to play the game, as my stepfather told me. Quote, "It's just like a role-playing game, Adam. You're playing the role of a soldier. Be that character for the duration of your contract. That's it." This time I would take his advice, and I was a model soldier. I was granted early access to higher rank at every opportunity to advance by my leaders, and I was always in a leadership position over others, mentoring them and grooming them to replace me for when I would inevitably leave. I learned to apply lesser magic on a daily basis to get through my service, and in the end, I thrived. In an environment that was the exact opposite of my very nature, I thrived. I decided not to re-enlist because I'd done what I wanted to do. I earned a GI Bill for college, and I left with an honorable discharge as an E5 sergeant. The military taught me that with a little hard work and lesser magic, you can do virtually anything. One without the other, though, well, you'll ultimately fail. I took the responsibility of a soldier, my own mistakes, my soldier's development, and my job head on. Though it wasn't easy, I did it anyway because I knew I could handle it. I gained confidence in my youth, confidence to step in when a friend was being attacked by a bully, confidence to stop my own friends from being the bullies, and the shame of realizing when my behavior was bullying. I accepted the consequences of my own actions and learned from them, moving forward with my best effort not to repeat them. I spent my fair share of time in front of the first sergeant and company commander for falling short in my commitments. I accepted an ass chewing when I had to and doled them out onto my soldiers when necessary. The experience of the military forced me to accept and learn responsibility. I know at my core that I am an animal, but more, my awareness of it and acceptance of the responsibility of my actions allowed me to grow past that base of the human experience. I would graduate college and spend my career successfully living the goals of my youth, but it doesn't end there. As a Satanist, I ponder what it means to be a man, to be the best version of me. I'm on a path to self-actualization, and the only way I can do this is to direct that fault of brutal honesty that contributed to my outcast youth toward myself in everything that I do. This means I am rarely satisfied, seldom content, and never happy with the project that I'm working on. I am hyper-aware of its flaws. I take the responsibility for those flaws and do what I can to correct them. I give my word with the confidence of a man with the best of intentions to see it through. If the act falls short, I'll try to correct its course, and if it still fails to meet a minimum standard of excellence, I must end it or fall into a trap of counterproductivity. I refuse to be lulled into a good enough stance, and though it means at times I break my word, I must be honest with myself and those around me. Lesser magic is only effective with hard work, but if you're using lesser magic on yourself to get along or to keep your word, you are nothing. This is not satanic behavior, and it does you no favors in the end. As a career professional, father of 2 intelligent children, and husband to a supportive wife, it's the experiences I have and learn from that make me the man I am today. My nature is undeniable, demanding, difficult, but driven. I'm capable of doing anything I want in life simply because I am willing to work for it and exercise my authority with lesser magic to see it done. However, I am not so blind as to be unable to end a project or friendship if it doesn't live up to my standards or vision. Yes, we are animals and inherently flawed, if not by our genetic makeup or physiology, then by our human nature. We can be in control and decide to be more than just an animal. All you need to do is stand up, find your direction, work toward it, exercise control over it, and shun those who would try and drag you down. Man up and own you. Be the Satanist that you were born. Hey, Satan.